Hi, my name is Matt Creedon and welcome to Music is Medicine. There's something I've been thinking about. Have you ever noticed that two people can listen to exactly the same piece of music and have completely different experiences? One person is moved to tears, another one becomes irritated, and a third hardly notice it's playing at all. So where did the experience come from? The music or the listener? It's a question that has fascinated me for years because the more I've taught music, the more I've realized that two students can sit at exactly the same piano with exactly the same teacher, learning exactly the same lesson and walk away with completely different experiences. One leaves saying, "That was amazing." The other one says, "I'll never understand this." The lesson was identical, the music was identical, something else created the experience. I remember when I first began learning music, I would open a page of notation, and before I'd even played a single note, I could feel my shoulders tighten, my breathing become shallow, my stomach knotted itself into a little ball. Nothing had actually happened. The notes hadn't attacked me. The page hadn't become complicated. Yet somehow my body had already decided that what I was looking at was difficult. Looking back now, I don't think I was reacting to the music. I was reacting to an image I'd already created in my mind. And isn't it that fascinating? Because we do this everywhere, not just with music. We meet someone for the first time and within seconds we've decided whether they're friendly or arrogant or trustworthy. We walk into a room and instantly decide whether we belong there. We look at a piece of music and decide whether it's difficult, all before we've had enough experience to really know. So today's reflection says, my thoughts are images that I have made. When I first read those words, I thought, surely that's not true. But then I began watching my own mind, and I realized just how often I wasn't seeing reality. I was seeing the story I had already written about reality. That discovery eventually led to me creating what I now call the easy key. Not because the traditional way of teaching music is wrong, far from it. The notes are still the same, the chords are still the same, the piano still the same, nothing has changed. But what changed was the way I looked at it. Let me give you an example. Imagine I ask someone who's never learnt music before to play a C major chord. Immediately the mind begins asking questions like, what's C? What's major? What's a chord? Before they've even touched the keyboard, they're already trying to solve 3 different puzzles. Now imagine I say something different. Find number 1. Now skip 1 number and play 3. Now skip another number and play 5. That's it. 1, 3, 5. They play the notes, a beautiful chord fills the room, then something wonderful happens. They smile, not because they've memorized something, but because they've recognized something. You see, a chord was never hidden. It was hiding beneath the language. Nothing about the music changed. Only the language changed. The pattern was always there. We simply removed some of the unnecessary complexity that had been hiding it. One of my favourite moments as a teacher happens about 20 minutes into an easy key lesson. A student who spent years saying, "I'll never understand music theory," suddenly stops, looks down at the keyboard, looks at me and smiles and quietly says, "Hang on, that's all it is." And I absolutely love that moment because they're not celebrating another piece of information, they're celebrating recognition. Recognition feels completely different from memorization. Think about learning to read. When we're children, we don't see words, we see individual letters, like the word cat, C-A-T. Slowly, painfully, we sound them out. Then one day something extraordinary happens. We stop reading the letters and we simply recognize the pattern. Cat. The letters haven't changed. Our eyes haven't changed. What's changed was our ability to recognize the pattern. Perhaps music works exactly the same way. Beginners see individual notes, experienced musicians don't. They see relationships, they see movement, they see patterns. The more I thought about this, the more I began wondering whether music is really teaching us notes at all. Perhaps it's teaching us to recognize patterns. I've started calling this our super brain because the brain is already extraordinary. Every second of every day, it's searching for patterns. That's how you recognize your best friend's face. That's how you recognize someone's voice before they've entered the room. It's how you finish another person's sentence. It's how you know your favorite song after hearing only the first two notes. Pattern recognition is one of the greatest gifts we've ever been given. And the Easy Key simply speaks the brain's native language. Instead of saying, here's another 100 facts to remember, it quietly whispers, look at the pattern. But here's where it becomes really interesting. Sometimes the brain discovers patterns that aren't actually true. One bad performance becomes, I'm terrible on stage. One wrong note becomes, I'm not musical. One difficult lesson becomes, music theory is impossible. The brain isn't trying to hurt us, it's simply doing what it's evolved to do. It's looking for patterns. Sometimes it just finds the wrong ones. The beautiful thing is that when we reveal a clearer pattern, the old one often disappears all by itself. Not because we fought it, not because we argued with it, simply because something truer became visible. And maybe that's why the Easy Key works. Not because it changes music, not because it reveals the pattern that was always there. And perhaps awareness works exactly the same way. Maybe peace isn't something we have to create. Maybe it's something we begin to notice. Once enough confusion falls away. The idea stayed with me for a long time because it made me wonder, if our minds can create stories about music, what else are they creating stories about? And that's what brings me to another question I've been quietly living with. Do we ever really hear sound, or do we mostly hear our memory of sound? Think about that for a moment. A bird begins singing outside your window. Before the song has even finished, your mind has already spoken, I love birds, or perhaps, I wish they'd be quiet. The sound lasted only a few seconds. The story might last all day. The same thing happens with music. A beginner hears a page of notation and thinks, that's impossible. An experienced musician looks at the very same page and smiles, the notes haven't changed, only the listener has. That's one of the greatest gifts music has ever given me. It showed me how quickly the mind labels experience. A wrong note, embarrassing, beautiful, interesting, failure. Maybe it's jazz. The note itself contains none of those meanings. They're all added afterwards. Imagine a toddler sitting at a piano. They press a note and then another, then another. They're not worried about getting it wrong. They're simply exploring. At what point did we stop exploring and begin judging? Somewhere along the way, music stopped being an adventure and became a test. Perhaps that's why so many adults tell me that they aren't musical, not because they can't hear, not because they can't learn, but because somewhere in their life they've learnt to judge themselves before they gave themselves permission to play. The Easy Key reminded me of something beautiful. Children don't learn language by memorizing dictionaries. They learn through patterns. They hear words repeated. They begin noticing relationships. Eventually, they stop translating every single word and they simply understand. Music is no different. The more clearly we see the pattern, the quieter the judgment becomes. I've also noticed something fascinating when performing. I've had audience members come up to me afterwards and say, that piece made me cry, and others say, I love the rhythm. Someone told me, have you ever thought about taking singing lessons? I couldn't help but smile. Who's right? Perhaps they all are. They're not describing the music, they're describing the experience of the music. For years I've tried to control that. I wanted everyone to understand exactly what I meant. Then one day I realized that's impossible. Every listener arrives carrying a lifetime of memory. Every listener hears through a different pair of ears. Someone who's just fallen in love might hear hope. Someone grieving a loss might hear sadness. Someone else may simply hear a pleasant melody. The music is the same. The experience isn't. And that was one of the most liberating discoveries of my life, because I stopped trying to control everyone else's experience. Instead, I became interested in understanding my own. I began listening not just to the music, but to the conversation happening inside me while the music played. And I realized something. Criticism is just another sound. Praise is just another sound. Applause is just another sound. Silence is just another sound. Or no sound. It's my thinking that transforms those sounds into identity. If someone says, "That was wonderful," I don't suddenly become wonderful. If someone says, "That wasn't very good," I don't suddenly become less worthy. Those are sounds. My mind decides what they mean. And once I saw that, something inside me relaxed. Then another lesson appeared. Our thoughts don't stay inside our own heads. They spread. Have you ever walked into a room where someone was anxious? Nobody says anything, yet somehow you feel it. Or you've met someone who is completely at ease, and their calmness seems to settle everyone around them. Confidence spreads, fear spreads, joy spreads, curiosity spreads. The atmosphere we bring into a room is often far more powerful than the words we speak. The same thing happens in a music lesson. A teacher who believes a student is capable often helps that student discover abilities they didn't know they even had. A teacher who constantly communicates fear can unintentionally pass that fear along. Not through the lesson itself, but through the atmosphere surrounding the lesson. This made me realize that every thought I entertain is quietly contributing something to the world around me. If I spend an hour telling myself I'm hopeless, I'm not the only one living inside that atmosphere. The people around me experience it too. The opposite is also true. Every encouraging thought, every curious thought, every peaceful thought becomes something we quietly offer the people we meet. Maybe that's why music has always brought people together, not because we all agree, but because for a few moments we stop defending our stories long enough to simply listen. And perhaps listening, real listening, is where real healing begins. Because the moment we stop arguing with what we're hearing, we create space for something entirely new to appear. Not a better story, not a more positive story, just less story. More listening. If there's one lesson music has taught me above all others, it's this. Listening and hearing are not the same thing. Most of us hear all day long, but very few of us are truly listening. A note is played before it has even faded away. The mind has already spoken. That was wrong. It's out of tune. It sounded beautiful. I'm getting better. I'll never be any good. Notice what's happened. The sound arrived first, the story arrived second. Yet after a lifetime of thinking, the two became so closely woven together that we mistake the story for reality. Perhaps this is why so many musicians become trapped, not because they're incapable, but because they're listening more to the commentary than to the music. For years, I thought my greatest challenge was learning music. Now, I think my greatest challenge was learning how to listen, not just with my ears, but without immediately translating every experience into judgment. Because judgment is incredibly fast. Awareness is wonderfully patient. One waits, the other reacts. One observes, the other concludes. Music has been inviting us into awareness all along. Every time we hear a note, there is a tiny space before the mind speaks. It's only a fraction of a second, but it's there. And if we become curious enough, we begin noticing it. That little space changed my life. People often ask me how to deal with criticism. I understand the question. I've asked it myself many times. You spend hours creating something from your heart, you put it out into the world, someone loves it and someone else dislikes it. Another person completely misunderstands what you were trying to say, and for years I've thought I'd needed to protect myself from that type of criticism. Now I'm not so sure. Criticism is simply another sound. Someone vibrates the air with their vocal cords. Those vibrations arrive at my ears. Then my mind begins translating. Oh, they don't like me. Oh, I'm not good enough. I need to defend myself. But none of those meanings existed inside the sound itself. I placed them there. That doesn't mean criticism has no value. Sometimes another person's perspective helps us to grow. Sometimes it points towards something we generally couldn't see. But there's a difference between learning from feedback and becoming our feedback. One helps us to grow and the other quietly steals our peace. The same is true for praise. Praise feels wonderful. But if criticism doesn't define me, then neither does applause. If I built my identity on praise, I'd spend the rest of my life protecting it. Music has slowly been teaching me something much gentler. Receive both, cling to neither. I often think about surfing. You don't become a great surfer because the ocean stops producing waves. You become a great surfer because you stop expecting it to. Some waves are gentle, some throw you off the board. Neither one is personal. Life seems to work much the same way. Some performances feel magical, some don't. Some lessons flow effortlessly, others leave us scratching our heads. Some videos reach millions of people, others disappear quietly into the internet. Perhaps none of those experiences are the destination. Perhaps they're simply the waves. The real practice is learning how to ride them. The Easy Key taught me something I never expected. At first, I thought I was creating a simpler way to understand music. Now I think it was teaching me something much deeper. It was showing me that confusion often disappears, not because we work harder, but because we suddenly see the pattern. How many times have I struggled with something only to have someone explain it in a slightly different way, and suddenly you say, "Oh, now I see it. That little sentence, now I see it." Perhaps that's what awakening feels like. Not collecting more information, not becoming someone new, simply recognizing what has been quietly sitting in front of us all along. Maybe wisdom isn't about adding. Maybe wisdom is about uncovering. The chord was always there. The pattern was always there. Peace may be there too, waiting patiently underneath all the stories. When I first created the Easy Key, I thought I was building a music teaching tool. Now I wonder if it became a mirror, a reminder that the mind naturally relaxes when it recognizes pattern, and perhaps that's true far beyond music. When we begin recognizing the patterns in our own thinking, something softens. We notice ourselves predicting, judging, comparing, defending, seeking approval, trying to become somebody, and instead of fighting those thoughts, we simply smile because now we've recognized another pattern. Recognition creates freedom, not because the thoughts disappear forever, but because they no longer arrive as strangers. We know them, we've met them before, and somehow they lose their authority. Maybe that's why music has always felt sacred, not because certain notes are holy, not because one instrument is more spiritual than another, but because music gives us countless opportunities to notice ourselves, to notice tension, to notice expectation, to notice joy, to notice fear, to notice silence. And every now and then, if we're very lucky, to notice the quiet awareness that's been listening all along. The awareness that was present before the first note, the awareness that remains after the final note fades into silence. Perhaps that's who we really are. Not the performer, not the audience, not the applause, not the criticism, but the one quietly listening to it all. If you've been listening to this while driving or walking, maybe washing the dishes, or simply sitting with a cup of tea, I'd like to leave you with one small experiment. The next time you sit down to play your instrument, don't try to become a better musician. Don't try to play perfectly. Don't even try to impress yourself. Simply be curious. Notice the first thought that appears. Notice the first judgment. Notice the first story. Then gently ask yourself, is that the music speaking or is that my mind? You don't have to answer it, just notice, because every moment you become aware of the story, you become a little more available to hear what was there before the story began. And perhaps that's where music becomes medicine. Thank you for sitting with me today. Until next time, keep listening, because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't learning a new note, it's hearing the one that's been quietly ringing inside you all along.